It started with the sound of pounding fists on my front door. Outside, a group of men in dark uniforms stood tall, flashing fake badges that read HOA Police. Their voices were cold, their commands sharper than any I'd ever heard. Step. Outside. You're under arrest. My neighbors peeked from their blinds, whispering, certain I had done something terrible. But what they didn't know, and what these imposters were about to learn the hard way, was that I wasn't just another homeowner. I was a highly trained FBI agent. So the question is, what happens when fake authority collides with the real deal? Life in Oak Ridge Meadows was supposed to be calm, orderly, and safe. That's what the brochures said, at least. The gates at the front entrance, the trimmed hedges, and the spotless sidewalks painted the picture of a perfect community. For most residents, it was exactly that, a quiet escape from the chaos of the outside world. But for me, it was more complicated. Wasn't just another homeowner. On paper, I looked like everyone else. Two-story home, freshly cut lawn, and the occasional morning wave to my neighbors. But behind closed doors, my life was anything but ordinary. Because while my neighbors thought of Oak Ridge as just another suburban neighborhood, I was balancing two identities. One as a quiet homeowner, the other as a federal agent. And no one in Oak Ridge knew it. Most days, my cover life was simple. I jogged around the neighborhood in the mornings, sometimes stopping to chat with retirees who watered their lawns at sunrise. On weekends, I grilled on the back patio, the sound of laughter from kids riding their bikes echoing across the cul-de-sac. From the outside, I looked like anyone else, a man who wanted peace, privacy, and a safe place to call home. But I quickly learned that Oak Ridge had its own undercurrent of tension. The Homeowners Association, powerful, nosy, and far too proud of their clipboards, liked to remind everyone that they were in charge. Letters slipped into mailboxes, warnings tacked to doors, and reminder emails that felt more like threats. They prided themselves on enforcing order, no matter how small the rule. At first, I ignored it. Neighbors whispered about petty fines, trash cans left at the curb too long, a car parked at an odd angle, or a lawn a fraction too long. It was laughable, really. But it didn't take long before I saw just how deeply their power reached. One of my neighbors, an elderly widow, once planted a rose bush by her mailbox. Within a week, she received a violation notice claiming it wasn't HOA-approved landscaping. Another neighbor's son set up a basketball hoop on the driveway, gone within days after a final warning. It was a cycle of control, thinly, disguised as community standards. Still, I stayed out of it. My life, both the quiet one and the dangerous one, required balance, and I couldn't afford distractions. That was the plan. Until one evening, I had just returned from a long day, trying to juggle paperwork and a case that stretched my patience thinner than usual. The sun was setting, washing the sky in deep gold. I parked my SUV in the driveway, leaned back in my seat for just a moment, and took a breath. That's when I noticed them. A group of men, 3, maybe 4, walking slowly along the sidewalk, dressed in dark uniforms that weren't quite police but close enough to fool the eye. They moved with confidence, with purpose, as if they owned the street. One of them carried a clipboard. The others kept their hands near their belts, where radios or maybe weapons should have been. At first, I thought little of it. Security patrols weren't new in Oak Ridge. The HOA often bragged about its volunteer security initiative. But something about these men was different. Their eyes lingered too long on certain houses. Their posture wasn't casual, it was rehearsed. And then I realized they weren't just strolling, they were watching, studying, taking notes. When they stopped in front of my house, my pulse ticked faster. One of them pointed at my SUV, jotting something down. Another peered at the side of my home as if he was inspecting it. They didn't knock. They didn't say a word. They just stood there, silent, before finally walking off, their boots crunching against the pavement. Something was off. Terribly off. Later that night, I found a folded piece of paper tucked under my doormat. It wasn't from the city. It wasn't from law enforcement. It was stamped with the HOA's logo, bold and sharp, and written in an almost threatening tone. Failure to comply with HOA security protocols may result in enforcement action. Enforcement action. Those words echoed in my mind. This wasn't a parking ticket. This wasn't about grass height. This was something else entirely. And for the first time, I realized Oak Ridge Meadows wasn't the safe, quiet retreat it pretended to be. It was a powder keg waiting to ignite. And the people holding the matches weren't police officers. They were something far more dangerous. People who thought they had power they didn't actually possess. The HOA was playing a game they didn't understand, and they were about to pick a fight with the wrong person. The warning on my doorstep had been the first red flag, but it wasn't the last. The next morning, I found a bright orange paper taped to my garage door. It was bold, impossible to miss, and written in language designed to intimidate. Notice of violation, unauthorized vehicle, immediate compliance required. My SUV, perfectly registered, parked in my own driveway, well within every legal boundary, was now apparently unauthorized. The HOA's note accused me of having a non-compliant vehicle that threatened the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood. It was laughable, except it wasn't, because I knew what it really meant. Someone had been watching me. At first, I tried to brush it off. I balled up the notice, tossed it in the trash, and went on with my day. But that was only the beginning. Within days, new infractions appeared. A letter accusing me of leaving my trash bins out too long, though I had brought them in within hours. Another one citing improper landscaping, despite my lawn being freshly cut. Each notice was laced with thinly veiled threats, fines, legal action, and further enforcement. The pattern was clear. Someone had singled me out, and then came the so-called security patrols. Every evening, just as the sun dipped low, I'd see them again, those same men in their pseudo-uniforms, walking in pairs, moving with a military-like cadence. They weren't friendly neighbors checking for safety. They were watching. Sometimes they slowed in front of my house, shining flashlights across my yard as if searching for evidence. Other times, they lingered near my windows, murmuring to each other in low voices before walking off. Neighbors began whispering too. I'd catch glimpses of curtains twitching, heads ducking quickly out of sight. Some avoided me altogether, as if I were suddenly radioactive. Others gave me pitying glances, the kind that said, "Be careful." The air in Oak Ridge was changing. One night, after returning from a late jog, I noticed my mailbox slightly ajar. Inside wasn't the usual stack of bills and flyers. Instead, there was a thick envelope stamped with the HOA crest. I opened it under the kitchen light, the pages crisp and heavy. What I found nearly made me laugh out loud, though the anger bubbled stronger than humor. It was an official summons. According to the letter, I was required to appear before the HOA's Security Compliance Committee to address repeated violations and failure to cooperate with community enforcement. The language was chillingly bureaucratic, dripping with authority it didn't legally have. But the kicker, it claimed failure to appear could result in detention. Detention. The word clawed at me. It wasn't just ridiculous, it was illegal. The HOA wasn't law enforcement. They had no authority to detain anyone. But the boldness of the threat made one thing crystal clear. They were escalating, and I wasn't about to sit quietly. Still, I needed to be careful. My FBI training told me that direct confrontation without evidence would only make me look paranoid, or worse, give them leverage. So I started documenting everything. Every letter, every patrol, every suspicious glance. Photos, timestamps, copies of notices. If they wanted a war, I'd have the arsenal ready. But things didn't just stop at paper threats. A few nights later, I returned home to find something chilling. Parked across the street, angled toward my driveway, was a black SUV. Not mine, This one had tinted windows so dark they were practically mirrors. Its engine idled low, a faint rumble in the quiet night. I stood there for a moment, my keys frozen in my hand. The SUV didn't move, didn't roll down a window, didn't drive away. It just sat there, humming, watching. After nearly 10 minutes, it finally pulled off, slowly, deliberately, turning the corner and vanishing into the night. It wasn't paranoia anymore. It was surveillance. The next morning, another notice appeared. This time it accused me of harboring threats to community, safety. The letter demanded immediate corrective action, though it never specified what that meant. My jaw clenched as I read it. The HOA was building a paper trail, painting me as dangerous, as a problem that needed removing. And then came the night that changed everything. I was in my living room, lights dimmed, scrolling through case files, when I heard it. The sharp knock on the door, not the casual rap of a neighbor, but the heavy, rhythmic pounding of authority. I rose slowly, peering through the peephole. There they were. 3 men in full dark uniforms, badges stitched on their chests, radios clipped to their shoulders. Their belts carried flashlights, handcuffs, and something else I didn't like the look of. They stood tall, rigid, trying to project power. Open. Up, one barked, his voice muffled but commanding. This is HOA security. We need to speak with you immediately. My blood ran cold. HOA security? That wasn't a thing, not legally, not anywhere. I didn't move. I let the silence stretch. The knocking grew harder. Sir, failure to comply will result in enforcement measures. Enforcement measures, detention, safety violations. The language all connected now. They weren't just bluffing, they were acting like they had jurisdiction. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just a homeowner. I wasn't just a target for their harassment. I was an FBI agent, and their little game had crossed a line they would regret. I stayed quiet, heart steady, calculating. Eventually, after several minutes of unanswered pounding, they left, though not before slipping another notice under the door. When I picked it up, my hands tightened. It was an order of compliance, demanding I surrender my vehicle for inspection and appear at an emergency HOA security hearing the next day. The letter claimed, failure to cooperate may result in immediate apprehension. Immediate apprehension. The audacity was staggering. I set the letter down, staring at it under the lamp's glow. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was impersonation. Fraud. A crime. The game was over. I knew the climax was coming. They thought they were the hunters, circling in their black SUVs, waving their fake authority, pounding on doors with empty threats. But soon, they would learn the truth. And when they tried to take me, it wouldn't be me in handcuffs. It would be them. The tension had been building for weeks. Every note slipped under the door, every bogus citation taped to the mailbox, every cold glare from the so-called HOA security team. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. It started like any other evening. The sun had barely dipped behind the tree line, painting the neighborhood in fading orange light. Families were out walking their dogs, kids played basketball at the community court, and everything looked deceptively peaceful. But inside her home, the air was different, heavy, electric. She had felt it coming, the sense that the HOA wasn't done, that they had something drastic planned. Then the pounding started. 3 sharp bangs on her door. Not a neighbor's knock, not a delivery driver. It was the kind of pounding that demanded authority, the kind that sent a shiver crawling down her spine. She froze, listening, her instincts firing before her brain caught up. Through the peephole, she saw them. 3 men in dark uniforms that looked almost official. Black boots, tactical vests, radios clipped to their shoulders. They looked like police, but something was off. No squad car outside, no flashing lights. Just two black SUVs idling on the curb, engines humming low. Her stomach tightened. She had seen real tactical teams. These men didn't move like them. They had the costumes, yes, but not the discipline, not the training. Still, they carried themselves with a kind of dangerous arrogance. And in their hands, flashlights, batons, and holstered weapons. "Open the door!" one barked, his voice muffled but sharp through the wood. "This is HOA enforcement. You are under arrest for non-compliance." Non-compliance. The word hit her like a slap. They weren't even pretending this was about safety anymore. They wanted control. They wanted to humiliate her. And worst of all, they thought they could. She didn't flinch. Years of FBI training had taught her how to master fear, how to breathe steady under pressure. But the anger bubbling beneath her calm exterior was almost volcanic. Arrest her? In her own home? By a fake, self-appointed HOA police force? Not tonight. She opened the door just enough to step outside, keeping her posture relaxed but alert. The men squared up immediately, puffing their chests, trying to look imposing. One even reached for his handcuffs, as if this was some kind of movie scene. "You've ignored repeated warnings," the leader sneered. "The HOA has authorized us to detain you for violations. You can come quietly or..." That's when it happened. He reached for her arm. Big mistake. In a blur of movement, she shifted her weight, twisted his wrist, and had him face down on the ground before the neighbors could even gasp. His radio clattered against the concrete, his fake badge sliding across the driveway. The other, too, froze, their bravado melting instantly into confusion. They hadn't expected resistance. They certainly hadn't expected professional-level tactical skill. "You just assaulted an FBI agent," she said, her voice low but cutting through the air like a blade. The words dropped like a bomb. "And now you're going to answer for it." Murmurs rippled from the small crowd that had gathered across the street. Phones were out, cameras were rolling. What had started as another HOA stunt had just turned into a public spectacle. The two men still standing tried to recover, fumbling with excuses. We're authorized security," one stammered. But she stepped forward, her presence commanding, unshakable. "Authorized by who?" She snapped. "The HOA? Since when does a neighborhood board get to impersonate law enforcement? Since when do they get to put lives at risk with fake arrests and loaded weapons?" Her voice was rising now, fueled by righteous anger, years of training and the raw audacity of what they had tried to do. The man on the ground whimpered, still pinned under her knee. The neighbors stared in stunned silence, their phones catching every second. And then, the real police arrived. Flashing blue and red lights lit up the street, sirens cutting through the tension. Within seconds, actual squad cars pulled up, doors swinging open as uniformed officers rushed forward. For a split second, the fake officers tried to puff themselves back up, waving their phony credentials, insisting this was just a misunderstanding. But the real cops weren't buying it. Not when they saw the trembling man still held firmly under the FBI agent's control. Not when they heard her badge number, her title, her clear professional report of what had just occurred. The switch flipped instantly. The real officers drew, their weapons, not at her, but at the imposters. "Hands where we can see them!" The fake HOA police hesitated, then dropped everything, hands in the air. One tried to mumble about community enforcement, but his words were drowned out by the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. The crowd erupted. Some gasped, some cheered, but all of them knew they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The HOA had gone too far, and their scheme had just been blown apart in the most public, humiliating way possible. And yet, even in that moment of vindication, she wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because she knew this wasn't just about three men playing dress-up as law enforcement. This was bigger, deeper. The board members who had signed off on this, the ones who thought intimidation and fear could replace real authority, They were still sitting comfortably behind closed doors, but not for long. As the imposters were loaded into the back of real police cars, she looked directly at the cluster of HOA board members who had slithered out from their meeting house to watch. Their smug faces had paled, their whispers frantic. And she smiled, a cold, knowing smile. "Your turn is coming," she said under her breath. The neighbors caught it. The cameras caught it. And in that moment, the narrative shifted entirely. This wasn't just one woman versus an overreaching HOA. This was justice versus corruption. Authority versus abuse. And for the first time, the HOA wasn't holding the power anymore. The night ended with flashing lights fading into the distance, the imposters in custody, and the neighborhood buzzing like it had just lived through the whole climax of a movie. But for her, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something much bigger, because now the truth was out. And she had every intention of taking this fight all the way to the top.